It seems to me that your description of the system dynamics is quite realistic. It leads to the growth that we observe and to the dilemma that we're facing. When you indicated some hopes for solutions, speaking of the property where you better have a Kalashnikov at hand to defend it, that solution, it seems to me, is quite unrealistic, as you've indicated, through the need for defending it. Why is it unrealistic? I think what we have to do is send out the geometers and find out how many hillsides the Earth has to offer. And then we have the limit, it's the physical limit, to how many people we can sustain on this planet. So I wonder if you have included this question of sustainable population levels in your report.
Yeah, the population question always comes up. And have we got all those hillsides, and are they fertile enough and above sea level enough for the 9 million people? I mean, I was being a little bit flippant with that example. I mean, I do think there is something quite strong to be said about the idea of people who accept a level of subsistence that remains within planetary boundaries, and whatever that level is. And we've got people in the room who've done a lot of work on the area that entails. That's still a worthwhile thing to do. But you're raising the question about the 9 billion and about the population, and I think that's a really important thing to do. Actually, we struggled with it in the Commission a little bit, because it is, if anything, more inflammatory than asking questions about economic growth, partly because its prescriptions are either xenophobic or possibly imply control over people's birth and reproduction patterns that are seen as very interventionist. Now, I don't think that's a very constructive place to be, not to address it. I would say there's some mitigating elements in not having put it in there. One is that if you look over the last 50 years, for example, in something like carbon, you find that population and affluence about equally scale in terms of the impact. So they're about equally responsible over the last 50 years in terms of the impact. But as we move towards the end of the 20th century, the affluence factor becomes more important, and because of demographic change, the population factor becomes less important. As we move into the next century, it is going to be, in fact, more and more about affluence than about population. And one of the arguments in the book is actually that it's about making room for growth in the developing nations. And the interesting thing that you find through development is actually that population rates decline. So that if your strategy is to create the development that's needed to bring countries through that demographic transition, you have a bigger chance of addressing the population question as well. But none of that really, to me, although they're quite strong arguments, none of it obviates the need for as detailed, as thorough, as, if you like, provocative analysis of the population question as has now been created in relation to affluence and growth. I think population remains a really important thing to address.